Hello, and welcome to Worried About Nothing. We're going to talk about George Floyd today. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Kim.
And I'm Katya.
So, guys, it's a big topic right now with everything that's going on with the protests/riots that erupted from George Floyd's death. So, who would like to get us started?
Well, it's certainly a hot topic. I think it seems to be raising a lot of heated emotions in people around everything, actually. And I'm finding it, bringing it down to a kind of personal level, I'm finding it quite interesting, some of the reactions that I've been getting on Facebook and social media, because there have been a lot of posts saying, Black Lives Matter, and there's the Blackout Tuesday that happened earlier in the week on Instagram and everything. And I know there are a few people around the world that have been posting All Lives Matter, not just Black Lives. And I was one of them. And I got so much vitriol, so much poison from people. I was quite shocked, actually. There were a couple in particular that I just wanted to talk about. Actually, I might read it out if that's all right.
Sure, whatever you want to do.
I wrote on Facebook, somebody posted a flippant analogy implying that people who are posting All Lives Matter in response to the many posts saying Black Lives Matter are stupid, and that it's like telling the fire department they should be spraying their houses down, though of course that'd be completely stupid as their houses aren't on fire. So I had to take a moment just to grasp the arrogance of the statement and then gather myself to respond politely. And this is what I wrote in my comment. Actually, the reason that people I know, including myself, who are posting that All Lives Matter is not out of a naive peace and love reason or irrationally as our houses aren't on fire, as the post you shared facetiously said. It's because we agree that Black lives do matter and that what happened was a tragedy, but we are also aware of the many other senseless killings and torture of people of other races, creeds and colors, including babies and children, that aren't given as much media attention, if any at all. To use your analogy, it's like putting a huge spotlight on one house that is burning and bringing the full force of the media onto it while completely ignoring the rest of the street that's burning to the ground. Many of us who posted this aren't white and have experienced racism in sometimes severe forms and know people who have been killed or severely injured for being of a different color. It isn't just Black lives that matter. And they replied, yes, and right now we're focusing on our Black friends because they need our help. If we don't focus, nothing gets achieved. It doesn't replace such basic principles as be kind, but draws attention to one issue amongst many that needs particular attention right now. And then somebody else posted underneath, in US history, all men created equal doesn't ring true, does it? That's why Black lives matter. Because all lives actually means white lives only, that's why we support Black Lives Matter. And I replied, explaining that I thought all lives matter in that racism is not just against Black people. Violence is not only perpetrated against Black people, it can happen to everybody. A person replied and said, you obviously don't understand what Black Lives Matter means. And it's just this level of, and both these people that commented were very, very white. Not that that should matter, but it does. And it was just that level of self-righteousness about it that was astonishing. They were correcting me on my stance on racism without even thinking about it because they were so sure that they were right in this. But I think that's just an example of how divisive this has all become. Yes, of course, Black lives do matter. Yes, of course, what happened to George was a tragedy, if it happened at all. But these tragedies happen all over the world to people of all different colors. And it's not just Black against white. And what this movement is creating is this massive division. And anywhere there's division, there's going to be conflict. And it's being played out around the States and also in the UK. The so-called peaceful protests have moved to the UK. And people are being injured and killed. And an example that happened in the States was, they were protesting about Black Lives Matter. And people died. There was a Black cop, for example, that was killed defending his friend's shop. And there's been no coverage about that, no outrage about that. But if Black Lives Matter, his life matters too,
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
So it's just so hypocritical. Some of it, not everything. Obviously, there are peaceful protesters who really do believe they're doing the right thing. But again, it's that division. It should be that all lives matter because everybody counts. It's not color, it's not race, it's not this, it's not that. And the more division that's created, the more separation there is. It doesn't make sense to me.
No, we're separating people for sure. And after watching what's happened, it just felt so staged to me. It just didn't feel right. Plus, why do you want to, if somebody got killed, why do you want to protest to kill more people? That just doesn't make sense. Wouldn't you just show some love for that person instead of killing more people?
And instead of going in with the intention to cause harm and damage, you know, I'm seeing more and more first-hand accounts and seeing videos and reading posts of people who are experiencing this, you know, that level of violence and riots and fear that's been inflicted intentionally, you know. So there's one post I read yesterday by this guy, and he was in one of the suburbs of Las Vegas, and he was saying that on message boards of the area, you know, messages are springing up by people who had the intention to loot and burn and damage. So they were gathering people around saying, okay, let's forget Vegas for now. Let's go out into the suburbs. Let's loot their shops. Let's destroy the buildings. Let's burn their cars. It was a defined intention. And so this guy and several people that lived in that area kind of were trying to protect their town. And they saw lots of people, you know, filling up glass bottles with gas, wanting to make Molotov cocktails and scouting the area. And the police were out in force, and they were saying, you know, be careful, put your cars in the garage because they will try and set fire to them. You know, they want to cause mayhem and chaos. So it's taking something that allegedly is peaceful that people are using to fuel more rage and hatred and pain and suffering intentionally. I just can't get on board with that at all.
Yeah, it's starting to feel like anarchy for anarchy's sake to me. Like, there's no way in my mind that the type of violence or really like terror that they're striking into people is going to produce anything. Like, they're not doing it with an intent for a good outcome. I just don't see violence begetting anything but violence.
Yeah. You know, you see the lovely imagery of the peaceful protesters, people embracing and all this kind of thing, which is great. But with every kind of peaceful protest, there is that faction of people that are intending to cause harm. You know, I saw a video just yesterday of one of the protests in London. It was around Downing Street, and it wasn't massive. You know, there weren't any deaths, but, you know, I think there was something like 23 people injured, two policemen were hospitalized. But it's just watching it, it was just people breaking through the barriers, intentionally wanting to harm the police. And you couldn't hear it, so you don't know what was being said. But it seems to be springing up everywhere. And, you know, whether it's an organized thing. I mean, I saw a video just yesterday. There's this journalist called George Webb, and he was talking about how this is all a massive staged thing, you know. So the Antifa, or the people that call themselves Antifa, are global, and at every protest site, there is legal advice that's ready for them, ready to bail them out of jail, medical support there in place already before the peaceful protests start, ready to look after them all, you know. And he was talking about how it's a global thing. The communication is just happening internationally. And it's just such a massive shame, to put it lightly, that this kind of thing happens.
And that's very interesting about support available to them, because I know in my community, well, in the biggest city, where there are even quiet protests taking place, sometimes they're not even covered in the local newspaper. So there's no mention of the protests going on. The only way I was able to find out there was a protest is driving through and see there is a peaceful protest going on. So it's interesting what you're saying. Usually there is no coverage, and they try to kind of make it invisible.
I think that's the thing too, though, is them not, like, that's why people were driven to violence, because they're like, well, no one's going to hear us otherwise, because like you're saying, they don't cover the peaceful protests. I think it's unfortunate. I saw a post in a group that I'm in saying that they should all be vigils. That's what we should be doing, because vigils were never followed by riots. And I was like, that, how much more beautiful would that be? everyone in silence, candles, whatever. We can do candles on our smartphones now. So we don't need any more fire, in my opinion.
Yeah, it would be beautiful. But I think it is the organised protests, the ones that, for example, some of the protests that are happening in London, there are, I think it's 4 or 5 this week. We've already had 1 or 2, and they're organised by Black Lives Matter. And so there's been posters that have been going up everywhere, just kind of advertised and giving the dates and telling you the time. And what they're saying on the poster is, wear your mask. But the thing that concerns me is, another thing they say on the poster is, wear non-identifiable clothing, which is a very strange thing to say. To me, that conjures up images of people with masks wearing non-identifiable clothing suddenly becoming a mass. You take away the individuality of the people, and it's a sea of people that can be directed or driven by the underlying emotion of crowds, because that happens, in crowds. When a lot of people get together, there's always some waves of emotions that go through and drive the action or drive the impetus. And to me, it seems a little bit worrisome.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was thinking about stuff like that because, a lot of the times they're wearing all black and stuff, and you can wear black. Maybe that's your way of expressing mourning for the situation. But I've seen at least a lot of videos that say that people are really upset about these violent people coming in, kind of co-opting their cause. So I would recommend, maybe everyone wears white. The people that show up in black, okay? Clearly you're not here for the right reasons. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's something that would work, but just kind of maybe a way to differentiate yourself and the people who are there for the right reasons from the people who are there to incite violence. It's really unfortunate that the mask thing was pushed so heavily with COVID, because I feel like, it just feeds so much into this, because then there's no thought to the fact that these people are masked. It's like, oh, of course they're wearing masks because we're in the middle of a pandemic.
But it's funny that we're in the middle of a pandemic, yet all these protests are happening with people standing shoulder to shoulder. It's like suddenly the pandemic is no longer such a threat.
Disappeared rather quickly, if you ask me. Yeah. Pretty convenient.
I know, slightly suspicious.
But it's also, what is it going to turn into? Into the fight between 2 political parties, right? There is election coming up, and what are we seeing? Right now, it's division between black and white, and then what is it going to be? Between Republicans and Democrats? I don't know what this whole thing will turn into. Definitely division, definitely not uniting people together. Definitely not seeing as a war between dark and light and standing together and seeing the real evil, but finding another reason to make people angry and fight for something that doesn't need to be there. I feel that this hard times already taking place and many people having to stay home. It's more important to remember that we all together, we are the people, and we shouldn't be fighting against each other. It's actually very interesting. I have a friend who's indigenous, and she said one profound thing to me at some point, that the reason, when Europeans came to Canada, the reason they couldn't defend the land is because they were fighting between themselves. They were not united. There were constant fight between little groups. And if they were standing together, they had more chances to defend the land. And I was like, totally. And this time we're dividing people by color, by nation, I don't know what kind of other divisions are there, by their opinions about politics. It's all these divisions that are taking place. And I don't see how it's helping us, the people, us, the humans.
No, exactly. That's exactly what's happening. It's dividing people in every area that's possible to divide them, and hitting all the hot buttons as well, the hot topics. And for whatever motivation people might have for it, they're jumping on the bandwagon. And it just shows the power of manipulation and the power of suggestion, how deeply ingrained it can become, how much people will listen to the media, will believe everything that they're fed because they trust the source. But it is such a divisive thing. I mean, I remember, you know, I have experienced racism throughout my life, but there's been sort of peaks at times. And one of them was when the Brexit vote went through here in the UK. And I remember very clearly the day after, when the results were announced, I was walking down the street and I was told to fuck off home several times, just walking down one street, because I'm not white. And that level of hatred is buried deep in people. It doesn't just manifest suddenly, you know, it has to be in there. And so at the moment, this little spark is being set to all of these torch papers, things that people feel very strongly about, you know, whether it be racism or whether it be Trump or whether it be whatever else politically. And fires literally are starting around the world about this. And it's just causing such fear and panic that people can't think straight. And it's a very terrifying thing. And like you say, it's kind of fighting amongst themselves. Nothing's going to get resolved.
Right. Yeah, because I see people also talk about like institutionalized racism and things like that. And I'm like, what you're doing isn't helping. Burning down businesses, like these businesses didn't create this racism that you're fighting. These are people that live in these communities. A lot of them worked really hard to build what they built. I can't imagine how it would feel as someone who built a business watching it burn, or like their children, right? Like the family that they're trying to provide for through this business. And they're like, maybe you're a little kid. You don't really understand what's going on, but all you know is now your parents' business is burnt. That might like seed some hatred in you on some level or something. I just don't see it.
But it is so insidious like that because it is planting those seeds. I saw another post recently about this woman who was really angry, and understandably so, because she said her small child, I don't know how old, but small child was watching Nickelodeon. And suddenly a message popped up, you know, one of those advertising messages that were almost subliminal. And it was basically George Floyd's words. It came up and it said, "I can't breathe." And the child was terrified and ran to the mum and said, you know, "What's happening?" And she had to explain what that meant. And it's like, there you go, there's a seed that's being planted. Fear attached to racism, fear attached to oppression. That child is going to have a very vivid memory because of that fear, that terror, and will attach it to what they're being told to attach it to.
Yeah.
And it happens like that. It's just so sneaky.
It's kind of disgusting to me. That's personal between that parent and that child, in my opinion. And it's the parent's decision whether or not they want to approach the topic with their kid. And that's kind of like forcing the issue. You're going into a space that's meant for children, and you're bringing up what I would consider an adult topic.
Without the choice or consent of the child or the parent. You know, like you say, exactly, it's down to the parent to sit their child down and say, okay, let's talk about this. But to have it come up like that and have to speak about it through fear as well. It's not like it's, you know, as a parent, I'd imagine that there are some topics that you can not sugarcoat exactly, but you can present in a way that will not cause terror and fear, you know, will not cause the child to panic. But this way of doing it does. It has a huge impact. But all this kind of stuff is happening. It's all these tiny little flames, all these little sparks that are being lit just to cause mass upheaval, mass chaos, mass destruction as well. Mm-hmm. You know, because the more people that in these peaceful protests that have riots at their heart, the more people that get injured or killed, the more there can be a slanted narrative of, yes, see, look, more Black people got killed by white cops, not focusing on everyone else who's being injured or killed or whatever it might be, you know. And I think one thing as well that sometimes concerns me about these kind of uprisings is that a person, no matter who they are, can sometimes be raised to this sanctified martyr, semi-demigod status. And I'm not saying anything about George Floyd as a person. I don't know him. Never met him. I don't know anything about him really background-wise. But the fact that he's being held up as this shining example of hero status is concerning, because people sometimes do that and they kind of hold somebody up to this unachievable, inhuman standard that they can put their own, whatever they want to put on it, their stamp, their belief system, you know, get behind it, and forgetting the fact that this person is a person. They make somebody into their own image, as it were. I always find it a bit uncomfortable when people raise somebody else to the status of demigod, because I don't know exactly how to explain it, but there's something around that sort of fervid worship or somebody being a figurehead for a cause.
Yeah. I think I can kind of feel what you're expressing, I think. And to me, it's coming through like that person can do no wrong. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of information comes out from there on out, then that person is just, nope, that can't be true because this person is the shining example of whatever it is. That's how it felt to me. So I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Usually when I watched a little bit about manipulation and how when the government and people who work for them, they actually did a bit of training on how to manipulate people and present messages. It's the first message that has the most emotional impact that matters. Even if they later on they come in and correct it and say this is not true, this is wrong, people won't accept it. Because emotionally they've already attached to the first message. And this is very, very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And it shows the power of emotions as well, that as soon as somebody emotionally attaches to something, that's it, it's ingrained. And then you add that person's emotion to another person's emotion, and then it builds and builds until you have a sea of emotions, and there's no stopping it then, because everyone's feeling the same thing and the wave is going in exactly the same direction. Because I'm finding that, with some of the feedback and people posting on social media and such like about this, it's taking it so deeply onto a personal level, that people are not disagreeing with each other politically or in their beliefs, but they're really personally disagreeing with each other as human beings. So the kind of comments and insults and attacks that are happening are personal. So it's not even that I believe you're wrong and let me tell you why. It's you're stupid or you're ignorant or you're whatever it might be. And it's violent and it's vicious and it's full of hate. And I think that's one thing that's very important as well in all of this, is that it's not just the physical violence and brutality that has an impact, it's the psychological violence, the mental and emotional violence. So if somebody is telling you you're a fucking idiot for believing something and you're stupid and you know nothing and attacking you, like I witnessed yesterday on Facebook, those are scars that last too. It's not just the physical scars, so that causes even more division, even more separation between people, and causes more isolation, because the person being attacked may feel that they're on their own, and that will cause them to withdraw into themselves more, and that takes away that sense of community and security and what have you. So all of this is happening on so many different levels. It's not just the rioting outside and the physical violence and the looting of possessions, because that's terrible and tragic, but it's the impact on lives, whether it might be they're killed or they're injured or they're psychologically scarred or they're damaged or they feel that they can't cope with life, or with all of this, with the COVID-19 and with all of this Black Lives Matter and everything that's happening, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a spike in suicides and people feeling they just can't carry on or can't cope, which is another massive tragedy about all of this. So there's tragedy on a number of different levels. And I think, self-righteousness is not a foundation stone to live your life from, because it's almost, if you look at the energy of it, it's square and sharp and very delineated, because it's almost like a parroting of what is said elsewhere, in the media or whatever it might be. There's no movement to it. There's no flow. There's no organic allowance for new information to make a difference, or openness to new information or other perspectives, and this huge wave that's just building and building and building. Even looking on Instagram, was it Tuesday? The Blackout Tuesday. Every single post was just a black square. Pretty much every single post was just a black square. And I just felt myself, I had to get off Instagram because it bothered me. But there was also, because part of it was, there was an energy behind it of, and I'm not saying I agree with this 100%, but I saw one post on Instagram and somebody had put a black square, and then inside they put the text, I'm a good person because I put a black square up yesterday. And I'm not saying that I feel that sharply about it. But there is an overtone of that sometimes with some people that have been posting that I've seen on my friends list, for example, that I'm not racist because I'm posting a black square, or I'm not racist because I think all Black Lives Matter. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have to prove that to anyone. You shouldn't have to push that. You know, that shouldn't be a motivator as well, somehow. You know, I think because I'm not white, so I don't know what it's like, and I have experienced racism in my life, so I know what it's like to be on the receiving end of it. And round about the time when Brexit kicked in, I remember there were quite a few white people that I knew that were posting things on Facebook about solidarity and all this sort of stuff. And there was something about it that just bothered me because the tone was off. And I had to comment on a couple of them and just say, well, I'm sorry, but that is kind of patronizing, or that doesn't really feel true to me. And there was almost like a bending over backwards to make me feel better about the fact that I wasn't white. So the angle wasn't, I'm sorry, I'm not racist. I feel everyone's the same. It was to make me feel better about the fact that I wasn't white and to make me believe that they weren't racist. You know, and again, it's pushing that kind of the self-image thing, which I don't feel comfortable with because it's not genuine.
I haven't experienced anything like that, but I mean, I did to a little bit of extent based on, I guess, country you're born type of thing. So I did experience some judgment, especially in the UK for some reason. Maybe because Canada is a country of immigrants. But I do, you know, I know what it feels like when there's judgment behind, when people say one thing, but they actually judge you and based on, you know, as you say, some of the divisions they have in mind, either your country or the race or things like that. The questions I'm asking myself, which bring a different perspective completely, and it's not necessarily to this story, but to the whole violence thing, because we know right now the astrology is favorable for all the violence. And I wonder if those people who actually, because I do not believe this is true. I do believe it was set up to create this. But again, this is my own beliefs. And then I ask myself, based on my own beliefs, the questions, could it be that people actually did look at astrology and made it at the time when it was the most favorable to do that? So that one of the questions that I'm asking, and also because I've looked quite a bit at the predictions, and I know I don't want to bring any fear or anything, but there was predictions by a few people that it's a 60-year cycle and there might be beginning of the civil war in the US. And this was a prediction by Charles Nanner, who is completely not into looking into what's happening. He just purely looks at the graphs and looks what's happened in the time period. So that was kind of interesting that all of this began, I guess, and how all of this connected. Anyway, this is just the questions on my mind.
No, that's very interesting. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, the astrology does affect it, and whether it's that people looked at the astrology and found it an auspicious time, or because the astrology dictated that now is the time because violence is going to erupt. You know, whether it happened organically that way, I don't know, but it's definitely something that's building and has been building and building and building. So we'll see what happens. You know, it's kind of like, will the boil burst and not be resolved, but something new will come into place, or is the boil still a long way from bursting? You know, like you say, civil war, I don't know, but this level of incited hatred and division is just very worrisome wherever it goes, you know, whatever ends up. But then again, it's part of the process, I guess, that, you know, throughout history, whenever there's been times of great change, there's been huge unrest beforehand.
Right. For me, though, it's the motivation behind the unrest. Because to me, this isn't a true movement of unrest. The peaceful protest part of it, yeah, sure. People are angry about what happened. It definitely appeared to be excessive use of force. So I get that. But it's kind of like the actions don't match the sentiment with the people who are looting and setting things on fire and just destroying things to destroy things. To me, that's not a true movement for the kind of unrest that would bring the change like, the American Revolution did. So I do think that there are good things that can come out of this. Things are, in my mind, are being exposed. I think a lot of people are seeing what's going on, like with pellets of bricks showing up out of nowhere, not near construction zones, being ready to be thrown. So there are things that are coming to light in all of this, but I don't think that the motivation behind, or maybe the trigger and the co-opting, the energy is just not, it's not coming from a place of truth, so it's not going to bring the true change that people are looking for, in my opinion.
Yeah. But, one thing I guess to bear in mind also is that this kind of thing hasn't happened in my lifetime. So I've never been witness firsthand to something like this, so everything that's happened historically, we get the perspective of those who were there, and by definition, the perspective is through the eyes of the individual, or the way it's been written historically. So maybe there was this kind of truth-untruth mix, or this division in times gone, because there's certainly an energy of movement forwards, and the motivation, as you say, is off, but underneath that there's this movement of change, this huge monster, or whatever you want to call it, just a movement of change having to happen. And in some ways this is either a result of or a display of the change, if that makes sense. There's bigger things happening than just what's on the surface. So it will be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Yeah, what's also fascinating is that Hollywood jumped in and start supporting the protesters. Every time I see Hollywood jumping in on something, I was like, okay, that smells.
Yeah.
You better stay away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Which protesters are they supporting? Yeah. The ones that already have lawyers, or the ones that,
Maybe all this change unnecessary to create the brighter future for us, and really look forward to that future that is free from oppression, and it's full of true loving people who doesn't want to harm themselves, and they just want to work together collaboratively and share the knowledge and just enjoy the life peacefully.
Yeah, that's definitely the aspiration.
There's no need to create hate. We can just enjoy the life. But I guess we do need this change in order to remove those people who set us up against each other.
Yeah. And the frightening thing about that is how easy it is done. How easy it is to manipulate people, to spark these frenzies. But maybe it is one of those situations where it needs to be seen through to conclusion, to the point where people do see what's happening and realize. But then maybe some people won't. There's this woman on Facebook who's on my friends list, but we're not friends. But she wrote something, I just have to read this out because this made me laugh. So she wrote this about me. I mean, it's obvious it's about me because of the timing of the posting. But she said, an acquaintance has been posting the most wild-eyed, irresponsible, rumor-mongering claptrap repeatedly. Should I engage and ruin my evening, or defriend? I was like, okay, so fine. The temptation was to write underneath and go, it's all right, I'll save you the trouble. I'll defriend you.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I didn't write it, but I defriended her. But so some people have very differing views to me, and that's absolutely fine. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion and view. But it's interesting to me how my views that I'm expressing on my page are dismissed as utter claptrap and, all of these words that are very insulting. Whereas I'm in no way looking at what she's saying and saying, oh my God, you're talking such shit. And it's that defense mechanism, that closed response that to me comes from fear, because it's so anti anything that this person believes is possibly true that it must be delusional. I have to dismiss it immediately as something that's just lies and rubbish because there's something wrong with you, rather than entertaining the possibility there might be a spark of truth in it. So one thing that this person posted was, I'd shared a post about the Black Lives Matter London peaceful protests that somebody had written about, and they'd said about the being advised to wear non-identifiable clothing. And this person said, they said no such thing, and put the website. And then the person whose post I've shared posted a copy of the poster where it very clearly said, wear non-identifiable clothing. So it's like there's categorical proof there in black and yellow, because the poster was black and yellow.
I agree with what you were saying, Kim, though, about people being very close to stuff. I feel like there's no effort for understanding or like trying to be compassionate for another person's point of view. I really try to watch myself in doing that, because it is easy to just be like, okay, well, I've done my research, I've seen my sources, I believe this is true. But I forever try to keep myself open to being like, well, maybe there's something else. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Because I came from a place where I didn't know any of the things that I know now. And I felt differently when I didn't know any of it. So I don't know how I'm going to feel when new information comes up. But I need to remain open to that information and be willing to let my viewpoint evolve on things. Because who knows where I'll be at that point.
Yeah, and it's like we've said in previous podcasts, it's so important to, like you say, remain open, and also to see and read up on research both perspectives, because there's always a possibility that we're missing information, or we might learn something new, but it's the remaining open that's the important part. And closing down is what is causing all of this blind hatred, because if you're closed in mind and heart and you only believe one thing and that's the only possibility for truth, then there's nowhere to go from there. If you believe that whatever you believe and the only response is to injure, kill, maim, or loot or destroy, how is that helping anything or anybody, including yourself?
It's a good question.
Because all you're doing is encouraging, what you claim to be fighting against. If you're fighting against racism, or you're fighting against division, or you're fighting against whatever it might be, and you do that by injuring people or destroying property or exploding communities, you're no better than the people you're fighting against, or the ideal that you're fighting against. How does that make you right, in inverted commas?
I think some of it's motivated by the fear of being that, right? So they push it away. So it's like, I'm not racist, you're racist, because they're so afraid that maybe they had some thought, which we're not in control of our thoughts. I'm just going to say that. I have thoughts that I'm like, where did that come from? So if you're judging yourself so critically, like for your internal world, and now I had this thought, oh no, am I racist? And they try to compensate on the outside by doing something about it and be like, no, I've done this. That proves I'm not racist. And I feel like it can kind of snowball into what we're seeing, is that trying to prove so hard to yourself that you're not something, that you have to go out and crusade against whatever it is, even if it's not there.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not there. Yeah. I'm saying in some instances it's not there. I'm not talking about racism entirely not being there, just to be clear.
Yeah. But there's also a certain level of permission that could be granted for those inner thoughts, So just going back to when Brexit was announced here in the UK, up until then, it was kind of forbidden, as it were. We were supposed to be an open society, we were part of the EU, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then when Brexit was announced, it was like permission was granted for racism to become rampant. And all those who were either openly racist or pretended to be otherwise were given free rein to display that. People who are not white were being attacked on the street in broad daylight, whether in word or action. I experienced some of it. I know other people that have experienced some of it. And it was just like this flow of vitriol that came out. So everyone kept getting told to go home. And people who were born here were like, well, I am home, actually, But it just, it's like the gates opened. And in some ways, I guess this has as well, in a bigger way. And like you say, it's even if you don't think you are something, like, so if people have racist thoughts or they have some subconscious racism within them they don't really realize, this again can spark it, so if there's huge examples of that cause emotional reactions of black against white and something happening, that internal subconscious belief that you don't necessarily acknowledge will come out, and you have this violent reaction to it, and then you're given permission, because writing's happening, you're given permission to follow suit.
Right. So I think it's become clearer and clearer to me to watch and discern if the reaction that I'm having is an emotional one. And then to check if it really is true for me to take, whatever action based off of the reaction I had. Usually it's just to release the emotion and no action is needed.
Yeah. But a lot of people are kind of channeling that elsewhere.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say it's really interesting what you said, that people sometimes post certain things to prove themselves that they're not racist. And because I never had motivation to go and post something like that. So it's kind of interesting, the point that you brought up.
And it comes out in things sometimes that are supposedly neutral, like the woman that I wrote that long reply to that I mentioned at the beginning. Her next post, she took that post down. I don't know why, whether it's because of my comment or somebody else's comment, but her next post said, racism isn't something for black people to sort out, it's for white people to fix. And then she put Black Lives Matter. And I didn't comment because I didn't want to go there, but to me, that smacks of racism blatantly. That's white supremacy or white superiority. We're here to fix you. And under the guise of Black Lives Matter and being non-racist and supportive of the blacks, that's, I'd imagine, is quite insulting if you're black reading that. Again, that might just be my personal opinion, but
no, I feel like the only way is to do it together. You can't say we're going to take care of this because we created it or whatever. I think conversations need to be had, and it's a little difficult for me. It's like, how do you approach having conversations about racism? But I saw an awesome post in one of the groups I'm in. This woman was talking about a guy that she calls for services, like he does like machine repair type things. And she had a conversation with him about it. He was black, she was white, this was in the South. And it's just like, it was so beautiful, the exchange that she talked about. And it's just getting to learn the other people's experiences. Again, I feel like it goes back to that opening of compassion. Just because you haven't experienced racism doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, or like stuff like that. I'd like to see more sharing of people's personal experiences to get other people to kind of like open their eyes to things. Just share what you've been through so other people can kind of understand and try to relate. Because there are probably a fair amount of people who haven't experienced racism in their life, and they're like, oh, well, is this just something that's being thrown out there to stoke the fires? We don't actually have to worry about this. Well, then let's hear from people who have actually experienced racism too, so we can kind of get the dial moving, so we can get people to meet somewhere, or at least start having conversations about things. And maybe we have to come to a place where racism can't be fixed. I don't know. I don't think there might not ever be a world where every single person isn't racist. But I think the more we're able to have conversations about things, we can kind of see what can be changed and where we can move the dial. And I don't know, maybe we can do more than we think.
Well, racism definitely exists. I mean, an example is my husband. He was born in Mexico, and every time he goes through the airport, he used to be stopped by the security by checkpoint. While I would go through, and he would be stopped. So definitely, and they just say it's a random check. He was like, yes, surprisingly, every time I go through, I have a random check. Oh, things like that. So, and he also told me when he was at work, there was several comments made by people that were definitely racist. He learned not to react. He learned not to just not to respond to that. I think he learned not to have any emotional reaction to it too. I'm sure at the beginning it was very hurtful, but I was like, nah, I don't pay attention to these people. They don't know better, basically. But the thing is, because the division already has been created, I think that's where all of this is coming from. And the only way we can fix it is to learn to, I don't know, undo that division. I don't know how to do it, but I guess going back to becoming one, yeah, I don't really have the solution for that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think racism does exist. It's so deeply ingrained and embedded in humanity that there's prejudice against people that are other than you, that are different to you. It's that fear thing, I think. But yeah, it definitely exists. And I've experienced it from small, very casual situations. You know, casual racism in some ways is not worse than intentional, but it just shows how ingrained it is that people don't even realize it, you know. So I've been banned from going into places. I've had violence against me. People tried to throw bricks at my head. I've had a lot of sexual racism because unfortunately when you're Asian and female, there's a lot of sexual stereotypes out there. But I think like both of you are saying, it's really learning to see each other as people that I think is an important step, and not as a brand or a cause. You know, I think one of the issues I have with some of the people that have been standing up for racism who are white, and this is not a sweeping blanket statement, but just a couple of people, is that they're seeing me or Black people as a cause rather than me or Black people that they know or don't know as individual people. You know, so I think the important thing is to, like you both said, oneness, and seeing that people are people without wanting to sound like a cliche, you know, rather than judging by the color of the skin. I mean, I remember I had a conversation with the guy I used to work with who was blatantly racist and actually admitted it to me, which was kind of refreshing to have somebody admit it in words. But then throughout the space of a few weeks decided that he didn't want to be seen as racist, so tried to convince me that he wasn't, to the point where he would tell stories and he'd say things like, and I don't know what color they were, I didn't notice. So, well, really? So you're sitting on a chair, but you don't know that it's a chair, and you can't see that that's a table in front of you, so your eyes have stopped working, you know? And that's just burying racism down deep and pretending it doesn't exist, whereas it comes out, it has to come out, you know? But it's that fear of otherness, I think, sometimes.
Fear of the unknown. Because if someone, you know, appears other than what your experience is, then that's unknown to you. You've never experienced that.
Yeah, I've also noticed that in many cases it comes down to blame, because usually something happened in history. Just looking, as I said, at the native people, looking at, you know, even Mexico, that was at some point, you know, attacked by Spanish people. And it's so deep that even still nowadays, when you talk about Spanish people, it's so deep that there is that hate that always there. So if you want to sparkle something in Mexico, you need to talk about Spanish people. So it's the same, you know, you just need to go back to history and see where there was abuse or what has happened. If there was a war on abuse, then it's just so deep that, as I said, even my friend from the native community, she said, it's so deep, the hate of, you know, those who came out and to our land, that they don't see anything else. They can't go past that point. And it's really sad because it's easier to blame than just move on and realize, sure, it's happened, it's history. I know it's deeply ingrained in you because it's a programming. You know, there was suffering in your family or in, you know, in your grandparents, or depending how far it goes back to the history. But you need to move on, you need to evolve. You can't go back and change the history. But yes, it all comes back to the pain and suffering that was experienced in the past.
Yeah, that can be very deeply embedded, absolutely. But there comes a time when you just need to heal that wound. Why carry it to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation? just that closedness and that fear and hatred. It just consumes and causes so much division. I mean, it's true. It's kind of historically all nations and countries have been against each other, and it can even be, again, part of the casual everyday conversation. Is like, oh, I mean, even growing up in Belgium, for example, when I was younger, Belgians and the French are not friends, let's say. And I was brought up to think, oh, well, you're French, you must be superior, or you think you're superior, or this, and all the stereotypes come out. So I think if you grow up with all these stereotypes of other nations and other colors and people, and then you meet somebody from one of those nations or peoples that you may not have met before, all you'll know is the stereotype, and you'll imprint them on that person. So you don't actually see the person, you see the stereotypes. And that can happen all too often, I find. I mean, when I was, going back to what I was saying, when I was in my 20s, for example, and I got a lot of sexual racism because around that time, Thai prostitutes were kind of becoming known in society. So I used to work in a bar, in the evenings when I was at university. And the amount of indecent proposals I got, I mean, I could have had half those men arrested because it was just so disgusting, some of the things that they thought was absolutely acceptable to say to me or to do to me, or where they'd put their hands and all of this kind of thing. And they were imprinting what they knew about Thai prostitutes on me. And I obviously must be one of the Thai prostitutes because I was Asian. And it was, it was scary sometimes because it was one of those places that was open late. So sometimes I'd leave at 3 o'clock in the morning and go home alone. I'd get followed home or what have you, But yeah, that happens, and that needs to stop. It needs to stop. People need to stop having these closed opinions of each other and these stereotypes and these prejudices. And I know it's easier said than done.
Thank you for listening to our discussion today. We talked about George Floyd and the riots, as well as racism. If you feel like you'd like to get in on the conversation, please leave a comment down below. If you enjoyed this content, please leave us a like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.